Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Going for Two, presented by Home Field Apparel. I'm your host, Matt Brown, publisher of the Extra Points newsletter, part of the D1 Ticker family. My colleague and co-host, Brian Fisher, is unable to join us today. We've been doing a bunch of other video content, and weren't able to find a time to get everybody here on the same page. But don't worry, you're not going to be stuck just listening to me for 45 minutes. I wanted to bring in another old friend of mine, an old colleague of mine, Mike Rutherford, runs Card Chronicle. He's another Louisville area radio host. When Mike and I worked together at SB Nation, one of the columns that he did every year, which I loved and deeply appreciated, not just as an editor, but as a consumer, was a post to recap everything that's been happening with men's college basketball, specifically aimed at the college sports fan who has been mostly just paying attention to college football and is just kind of rejoining the world in mid-February. Right now, definitely the end of the football season. The games are all over except for the Super Bowl. National Signing days are now done. Maybe Auburn makes a coaching change. Maybe they don't. That's kind of a perennial thing for Auburn. But our nation's college sporting eyes are now shifting to men's and women's basketball primarily. So I wanted to bring Mike on to help explain some of those major storylines that maybe a filthy casual like me or somebody who's had their head down in other parts of college sports might have missed. Explaining Auburn and Gonzaga and teams that maybe we weren't expecting to be good and what mid-major programs you should keep an eye on. And I'm also going to talk for 25 minutes and completely space on the fact that this is Coach K's last season, because I assumed all of you already knew about that, but it's probably worth bringing up here again. So let's bring on Mike and help break some of this stuff down here for us. Mike, hey, thanks so much for hopping on here. It's been a long time since I've had a chance to talk to you, and it's great to have you on the show.
Of course, man. I couldn't be happier to be here.
Let me ask you maybe we can start here with a dumb question, because I thought back about that column you did for SB Nation for a long time where you'd reintroduce the nation to college basketball once college football is finally over. And I certainly find myself in that boat. So I'm looking here about what's going on. Let me ask you a dumb question. Number one, did we expect Auburn as a country to be this good this year, or are they a year ahead of schedule, or what happened?
We shouldn't have been. I mean, Auburn, to their credit, they know exactly how to handle, shall we say, NCAA issues seamlessly.
Sure.
They did a fantastic job. And last year, they made maybe the smartest move of any of the teams that have gotten caught up in this FBI deal, which I think, first hit all of our news feeds in 2002. I believe that's when it was first starting.
Yeah.
But it feels like it's been 2 decades now. But Auburn made the right call, because they had a couple of really good teams in the years immediately following getting caught up in the FBI stuff. And Bruce Pearl has it rolling. I mean, no questions about the man's ability to coach and to land recruits. And so last year, it seemed like it was probably going to be the most down year that Auburn has had in recent seasons. Also, you had COVID. There was no guarantee that the NCAA tournament was even going to be played. So Auburn does what a smart program does in that situation and self-imposes a postseason ban for that specific tournament. And, the team was just kind of okay last year. They probably wouldn't have made the NCAA tournament anyway. And now they get that out of the way. They finally hear back from the NCAA a couple of months ago, and they're pretty much in the clear. And they're rolling. Bruce Pearl has perhaps, I think, I use the word likely, number 1 pick in the upcoming NBA draft in Jabari Smith. They've got a bunch of holdovers from the team last year that I thought competed pretty well given their circumstances. And it seems like, we're talking about Auburn basketball potentially being in a position to make a second Final Four in 4 seasons. It feels very, very strange. But given how close they were to upsetting Virginia in 2019 and potentially winning that national title, maybe it shouldn't surprise us that we're sitting here and heading towards mid-February and staring down Auburn as the number 1 team in the country. Although they have shown a couple of, glimpses into potentially, I won't use the word fraud, but there have been a couple of leaks that we've spotted in recent weeks, almost losing to Tom Crean's woeful Georgia team the other night, probably being the biggest one, but still
I know
certainly a force.
They were down a couple of players in there, right? But I mean, going the whole season and only losing 1 or 2 games is hard, even if you have better talent than everybody you're facing. But I see what you mean. Maybe this is a team that maybe not every single person is going to write in pen in their brackets, but partly because of the name on the front of the jersey.
Yeah, I think that's possible. I think people also want to see them play. This is where the SEC scheduling kind of screwed up here. The Kentucky game was the big showdown. Kentucky gets, arguably their best player hurt about midway through that game.
Yeah.
They were already down another backcourt mate, and Kentucky being fully healthy with Ty Washington rolling now and Severe Willer, it seems like they've got two elite point guards. They've got maybe the best backcourt in the entire country, and they've been phenomenal basically since that Auburn game, which they still were right there in, despite being two guys down and kind of getting in foul trouble. I think a lot of people would love to see those two teams play again in Rupp Arena, but it's not going to happen because the SEC didn't schedule it that way. So the rubber match between Kentucky and Auburn is not possible. There could be a second meeting in the SEC tournament, but that's the game that I think people really want to see Auburn play. But since we're not going to get it, we just have to live with the SEC schedule they've been dealt. But hopefully we can get those two teams matched up again in the postseason, and I think that will give us a better indication of how far we should advance the Tigers in our NCAA tournament brackets.
Speaking of teams that maybe America hasn't had a chance to actually watch play, or as much as maybe they'd like, I want to talk about Gonzaga real quick. The bringing in a very un-Gonzaga-like recruiting class. You had some of the, even somebody like me, an extremely casual men's college basketball fan, had heard of Chet. And I had watched the team a little bit in the beginning of the season, and I wasn't seeing a guy that looked like a top 5 NBA draft pick. I know that they've barely played any road games. They had a couple of cancellations. They're the top Ken Palm team right now. Is this a national championship contender? Is this about what Gonzaga was expected to be, or is the jury still out a little bit on this team?
I think it's absolutely a national title contender. I think we're going to have the same exact discussion about Gonzaga that we've been having for 45 bleeping years at this point. Once we get to March, because they're going to have the gaudy record. I think that they could absolutely lose a game or two in the West Coast Conference. San Francisco's very good this year. BYU's good. St. Mary's is, as always, rock solid. Would not be shocked at all if they dropped at least one game to one of those three teams. But having said that, we're still going to be in the position of them probably being a number 1 seed when all said and done, and the rest of the country saying, well, I'm picking Gonzaga to lose in the first weekend because they never make it out, neglecting the fact that they've played in the national title game twice in the last 6 years.
Yeah,
they're absolutely capable of getting it done. I think the concern is it's twofold. I mean, Chet Holmgren is putting up numbers. I think Jeff Goodman put out there like a series of stats that he's put up that quite literally nobody has ever put up in the history of college basketball. Seems good. When he's playing against more physical teams like we saw at the beginning of the year, he has been a little bit limited. I think that you can – the lasting image in everybody's minds when it comes to Gonzaga, and whether this is fair or not, I can't say, is them looking like they were just bullied by Baylor in that national title game last year. I mean, Baylor from start to finish looked superior. They looked stronger, and they looked like, even with Drew Timme, who had dominated the tournament up to that point, they look like they had guys that just, we're not going to let you treat us like Portland or Pepperdine or one of these West Coast Conference teams. And I think that has stuck with people a lot. And the issues for Gonzaga are still probably that. Chet Holmgren, rail thin. It doesn't take a basketball genius to say, even though he's sort of a unicorn type player, if you get him in the post and you're just a bigger, brawnier dude, you can limit his effectiveness. It's why it helps that he has Drew Timme down there with him. Andrew Nembhard's still one of the best point guards in the country, still getting it done. The Florida transfer, he's been fantastic for them. So I think that they're great, but I think we're going to have the exact same debates about them this March that we've had for seemingly the last decade and a half or so.
So, and that's always one of the, this is something we see with college football too, where it can be frustrating where it's the same teams and we're rehashing the same kind of storylines. No one's had to make up a new joke since 2014 because, shit, there's Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State and everything. And this year, you have an excellent Kentucky squad. Your defending national champion Baylor looks great. Kansas looks great. Is there anybody that seems to have maybe come out of nowhere other than maybe Auburn, and Auburn's still been in that conversation, recently too, to be, an above average team, a 5 seed or above that maybe America is not as familiar with? I was thinking maybe Washington State, but maybe there are some better examples.
I think the one that comes to my mind is Texas Tech, just because they lose some of the talent from the last a couple of years from the rosters that have made them so formidable and such a force in the Big 12. And then probably more importantly and more notably, they lose Chris Beard to arch rival Texas. And, Texas loads up on talent. They bring back all of their backcourt guys. They bring in Marcus Carr, who was maybe the most sought after grad transfer on the market during the offseason. And everyone's thinking Texas is rising, Texas Tech's falling. And the reverse has kind of been true. They played last week in what was a very hyped game just because it was Beard coming back to Lubbock. And the Texas Tech fans, there was no like, hey, thanks for the memories, Chris signs, or like
no, that was brutal.
You feared for his safety a little bit when you saw the videos. It was hostile. But they basically took it to Texas from start to finish in that game. And I think a lot of people now are looking at this team and saying, Mark Adams was Chris Beard's right-hand man during these years where they were so good. He gets the job at Texas Tech. It doesn't seem like the Red Raiders have fallen off. In fact, they're probably a step above where they were last year. How much credit does Mark Adams deserve for the all the credit that Chris Beard has been getting for last season? That's going to be a storyline that I think continues to develop as the season and further seasons go on. But they've been tremendous. They almost beat Kansas in Allen Fieldhouse a couple of weeks ago, lost in double overtime, have not lost a game since then. They pummeled a good Mississippi State team in the Big 12 SEC Challenge, won the game against Texas. They've got, they get, I think, a fairly friendly schedule to end the regular season. They're really good. And to be quite frank, I did not see that coming at all. One other team that I think I could throw out there is I think Baylor being as formidable as they have, given everything that they lost from last year's team, just goes to show that Scott Drew, this isn't a flash in the pan type deal. They're here to stay. They're going to be national title contenders for as long as he's at the helm. And I know they haven't played as great as in recent weeks as they had the first 2 months or so out of the season, but I still think them being as good as they are right now, given how much they lost from last year's national title team, is at least a little bit of a surprise to me.
This is not a new or original point, but looking at how Baylor and looking at how Texas Tech have been able to still compete at such a high level despite roster attrition and coaching changes, I would imagine should terrify any of these new teams that are coming into the Big 12. And it's not like those are, Houston is an amazing team right now too. BYU struggled a lot the last 2 weeks, but we're competing at a tournament level. Looking at what that league might look like in 2 or 3 years, that's 10 teams that are capable of making an NCAA tournament every year, 11. Like that's the depth. Looking at those new squads seems outrageous, right?
Yeah, that's been the thing about the Big 12 in recent years is as strong as they've been at the top with teams like Kansas and then, Texas Tech in recent years and a couple of the other teams that have had fantastic seasons here or there, their biggest strength has always been, it feels like when you're playing the team that's like 9th or 10th in the conference standings, you're still playing a team that has an NCAA tournament hope, or that if they played in a different league would be an NCAA tournament type team. And there's just no easy games in that conference, especially since, you get a guy like Jamie Dixon who gets forced out of Pitt, takes over TCU, makes them formidable right away. They've done a great job at really investing into basketball in that conference. I think the head coaches that they have worked out tremendously. And you're right. Now you add in some more proud basketball-centric institutions. Houston is another team that I could have thrown out there. And when you asked about teams that have surprised, they've been ravaged by injuries. They lost a decent amount from last year's Final Four team, and they're pretty much right where they've been the last 4 years. They're 20-2 right now. Kelvin Sampson just continues to get it done. I think they're a top 5 team on KenPom. I believe they're number 4. And there's nobody really in the American that's stepping up and challenging them. Everybody thought it was going to be Memphis. It has not been Memphis, to put it lightly. Cincinnati, I think Wes Miller's going to get it done there, but he's still a year or two away from having the type of talent that he needs to be a legitimate challenger. It's Houston's conference right now, and it's going to be probably until they leave. So the Big 12, great basketball conference right now, only going to get better.
Let's talk about Memphis for a second. Because this was the program that, as I understood it, came in with really high expectations. They had done an absolutely outstanding job recruiting. They won the NIT recently. It seemed like there was always a gap between what was possible at that program and what had actually happened. And now they look bad, right? Like capital B bad. I know there's been some injuries. I know this team is young, but is there something else here that's happened? Is it just is the roster fit not constructed? Should we be giving up on Penny Hardaway? I saw the exchange he had with local reporters a couple of days ago that definitely seemed to convey a deeper sense of frustration than might be expected.
As many countries have found out over the years, when you stage a coup to have a semi-hostile takeover, it doesn't always work out great. Like the reasons behind the coup that seem fine at the time sometimes wind up blowing up in your face a little bit. And I think that's what you've seen with Memphis. And like coup is not really that strong of a word to
No,
talk about what happened with Penny Hardaway.
As a Louisville guy and as somebody that follows the SEC a lot, that's exactly the right word. You know all about palace intrigue. Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, for people listening who don't really know the situation with Memphis, you go from Josh Pastner, who's, I mean, the least Memphis person of all time. I can't think of a worse fit for any position in college basketball than Josh Pastner at Memphis, but he has a degree of success there. They go to the NCAA tournament, they win a game at least once. Then you hand the reins over to Tubby Smith, who's national title winning coach at Kentucky, long resume, and his issue is he's not getting along with the powers that be in the Memphis basketball world. He sends Diedrich and Kendrick Lawson's dad off the staff. They wind up transferring to Kansas, and they both have a lot of success there. And then the bigger issue for him is Memphis has this once-in-a-generation level of talent coming up through its high school ranks. They're all playing for Penny Hardaway on the AAU circuit. None of them want to play for Tubby Smith because he has not, I don't know, handled the AAU circuit well, has not become friends with the right people, doesn't say the right things. Sure. And so people behind closed doors are kind of like, we got to get this guy out. We got to get Penny Hardaway there so we don't miss out on all this 5-star talent that's right there in our backyard. That happens. The 5-star talent comes. James Wiseman plays precisely 2 games before he gets into NCAA trouble and decides, I don't need this. I'm going to go ahead and make millions of dollars to play this game. Yeah. And that's what happens. The other guys haven't panned out. They've taken a bunch of high-profile graduate transfers who just haven't clicked. And Hardaway has not been able to connect with this team, and he hasn't been able to get any guys to gel. And when I say this team, I don't specifically mean this year's team. It's really all of his teams. And I know they've had some bad breaks with injuries, and the team a few years ago with Wiseman would have been different if he'd been just allowed to play normally. But still, the problems definitely seem to be stacking up. The cons seem to be outweighing the pros when it comes to the Hardaway era at Memphis. Maybe he gets one more year to try to prove something, but it felt like this was kind of the show me season, and they're not really showing anybody anything outside of, I think, a lot of preconceived notions of how this was going to go from national media members.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think because, like, while some of the specifics here are very unique to Memphis, Penny is a capital M Memphis guy. And it's a little uncommon to have that sheer amount of talent within a 2 or 3 year period in one kind of mid-sized city. But the idea of corporate boosters and local AAU programs and athletic apparel companies and local legend all not being on the same page seems like that's happened numerous times. And trying to kind of rebuild a roster with high-profile grad transfers with promising freshmen, like that's a playbook that a lot of college basketball coaches use. Do you think there's anything from the Memphis situation that could be applied elsewhere, or is this just a combination of very specific Memphis things that have caused that not to work out?
I think it's a little bit of everything because on paper, there's no reason why this shouldn't be able to work. You've got Amani Bates, who had been hailed as the next LeBron when he was 15, and I mean, he brought a lot of baggage, and I think you're seeing now, I mean, the dad taking over the situation. Is he hurt? Is he not hurt? Is he playing? Like all that stuff is just easily, like Tom Izzo avoided it at Michigan State, and I think that they're all feeling good about it. But even without Amani Bates, you've got Jalen Duren, who's probably going to be a top 10 pick in the NBA draft. You've got some like normal transfers, like everybody. Like Landers Nolley was Virginia Tech's best player a couple of years ago as a freshman. He should be killing it. He's been just kind of like okay. Lester Quinones is a guy who's been in that program for a few years now. Earl Timberlake was a big time prospect coming out of high school. Like they've got guys, they just haven't been able to get it all to work. And I think what we've seen in recent years is that we probably, and this pains me as a Louisville fan to say, but we probably should have been giving more credit to guys like John Calipari, who've been able to get all this 5-star talent in the same place at the same time and somehow convince them all to put team above self. Because I mean, the stat gets brought up all the time about how little Anthony Davis scored when he was on that 2012 Kentucky national title team. He took like the 6th most shots of anybody on that team and didn't complain, didn't do any of that stuff. And he's gone on to have a decent NBA career. He's been pretty good.
I've heard of him. Yeah.
I think that you're seeing, like, with Calipari and Coach K convincing all of these 5-star talents with 5-star egos to put team above self. It doesn't work everywhere like that. I mean, you had maybe the most glaring example, LSU a few years ago with Johnny Jones, when they get Ben Simmons and they get Antonio Blakeney and they get all these 5-star guys together and they're talking, we're guaranteeing a national title or whatever. And by the end of the season, they are acting like they actively are throwing their SEC tournament game because they're just ready for the season to end. I think they lost like 78-20 to Texas A&M in that game, and they turned down the NIT bid. And it's just, it doesn't work everywhere. If you don't have the right person at the head of that, program, it's just going to fall apart. And Penny Hardaway has not given us any reason to believe that he's the right program to be able to get this to work with the playbook that he's using right now.
Yeah. I completely agree. This is something we've said a fair amount with about Nick Saban. And I think the Cal example, I think, is particularly apt because it's not just how do I meld all of these 5-star high profile athletes with big egos and legitimate, aspirations to play professionally very quickly to maybe take a back seat or become role players or be okay with limited minutes, which is something that happens on the football side too. But also, how do you manage all of these other warring factions? I've used the dictator coup example before as well. I think I've talked about Yugoslavia's Tito, right? About how to keep your freshmen and your sophomores and your boosters and your money people and your administration and everybody working together, which is really hard to do. And it seems like at a place where it'd be very easy for that to fall apart, like at Kentucky, and maybe where that has sometimes fallen apart at Louisville. It's worked, but it takes an enormous amount. I don't want to say cult of personality, but I'm kind of saying that a little bit, that just not everybody has, right? Like Chris Mack might be a good example of somebody who clearly wasn't wired that way in that particular market, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think the thing that coaches are running into now is, it used to be the summer bonding tours that you did, whether you take the kids to the lake or you have a foreign exhibition tour. It was all about getting the older returning players to mesh with the incoming freshmen, right? The recruits you're bringing in. Now you've got this weird dynamic where it's the younger players meshing with the older players who have been there for a while, and then also fellow older players who have been at sometimes 2 or 3 different programs already coming in and trying to get them to mesh with with both those groups. So it's different now than it used to be as recently as 5-6 years ago. And it's a challenge. And I think some coaches have kind of figured it out. I think also coaches are trying to figure out the best way to recruit given the transfer portal and it changing the game. And I think you're seeing a lot of coaches saying, at least at the power program, saying, I'll take 1 or 2 5-star kids if we feel like they're the right fit for our program. But I also want to go with like a back end top 100 kid, maybe a 4-star player more in the top 75 range, who I feel like we can keep in our program for 2 or 3 years, who doesn't just want to be playing professionally a year from now. I think you've seen Mike Krzyzewski do that a little bit after some of the issues that he had when they started going the one and done John Calipari Kentucky route. He's now started taking more back end 4-star players just to have that guy that he can build and kind of have lead in these circumstances. When you're bringing in both new players who are old and young, you want a guy who knows the Duke way or the Kentucky way or the North Carolina way who can pass that on. Because when you don't have that player, which Memphis doesn't really have right now, LSU did not have that 4 seasons ago, it can fall apart pretty quickly because there's nobody to tell them about, this is what we do, this is what the culture is, this is the way it goes. And when you don't have that, it's just everybody kind of doing their own thing. And sometimes it works, most times it doesn't.
Yeah, and the most effective programs, I think, will always tell you that has to come from the athletes themselves rather than the doughy middle-aged assistant who comes in who hasn't built those relationships. And I know that the trope, as especially come tournament time, is that this can be an advantage for mid-major programs where you might not have the same amount of roster attrition. You might be an older team. I think we've all seen the future accountant, a 5th-year senior point guard who suddenly lights up, and then that's how a big Sky team ends up winning the 13-4 game. Looking this year, I mean, Illinois, the Loyola is still, it looks like competing at a very high level. This seems to be one of the better Murray State teams, even without Ja here in the past couple of years. Are there any other mid-major programs that the hipster in your life should get on board with now, so then they can beat the smartest guy in the room in a couple of weeks?
Murray's fantastic. They're ranked in the top 25 for the first time in a while. I know that they're all celebrating there. Matt McMahon is one of the best young head coaches in all of college basketball. Would not be shocked if this time a year from now he's coaching a power conference program, or at least one of those sort of A-10 American.
Well, I mean, hey, they're going to be a Missouri Valley team in a little bit, so
that's true.
You got a chance here to kind of step in and take over Loyola's spot.
And the Valley's fantastic this year. It's not all just Loyola. I mean, if you watch Arch Madness, I think is my favorite conference tournament. It's sort of like the king of the mid-major tournaments. And those semifinals this year, I think, are going to be just outstanding because Loyola is terrific. Drake is very good. Missouri State is very good. Northern Iowa, I think, is a good team. Like, there are teams in that conference that can beat Loyola Chicago. But if you're looking at other maybe potential darling Cinderella teams, Belmont, it seems like they've won at least 20 games every single year for the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
We have to throw out, got to do it, Iona and Rick Pitino.
This is true. Although they finally lost the game, but they've been outstanding all season, right?
They had been 11-0 in the MAAC. They beat Alabama in their early season tournament, and they actually just got knocked off by Niagara, who is coached by former Syracuse football sensation Greg Paulus, a former, maybe more known by some people as a Duke point guard. I know him as a Louisville assistant for 1 year after Rick Pitino got fired and we had that makeshift staff. So
I think he got a cup of coffee at Ohio State too, if I remember right.
He did. He was there before he went to Louisville. So I was like, it's a budding rivalry, the Louisville coach and the old Louisville assistant, even though I don't think that Rick Pitino ever knew that Greg Paulus even coached at Louisville, probably before last week. But Iona's fantastic. I mentioned them earlier, San Francisco out of the West Coast Conference. I love Todd Golden. They call it nerd ball. He took over for Kyle Smith, who went on to Washington State. They are very analytics heavy. I think they're fun to watch because of that. The other night they were playing in a close game. They were up by 2 with 7 seconds left. I think they were playing Pepperdine, or it was either Pepperdine or Portland, whoever it was. They fouled San Francisco with the lead, fouled with 7.7 seconds to put the other team on the line because they fouled a free throw shooter. They looked at it and they said, the analytics tell us this guy's probably not going to make both free throws. And even if he does, we have the ball with a chance to win the game. If we let them hold it, they have a chance to take a 3 and win the game. We're going to take out the possibility of us losing in regulation. And it worked out. Kid made the first free throw, missed the second. San Francisco wins the game. Todd Golden is very good with stuff like that. I think that makes them fun to watch. The thing that I hate is that he's younger than me. Don't care for that at all.
I was about to ask about that because Paulus has to be about our age too. And this is starting to happen when more and more coaches are stepping in their early to mid 30s. And I have the same thing. It sucks.
I don't like it. I mean, in the Super Bowl, we got Sean friggin' McVay, who's, it's one thing if you're younger than I am. It's another if you're more successful and 1,000 times better looking. Like, you can't have all of that. I can't cheer for the Rams. And then they took Matt Stafford from my line. So I can't cheer for the Rams. I've got to have to go with the Bengals.
I forgot you were a Lions fan. This
Lions and Reds. So when Louisville's not rolling in sports, which I don't know if you've been following the news recently, I don't exactly have a pro team to turn to.
No.
The 2 teams in the big 3 leagues in American sports that have gone the longest without advancing in the playoffs. Number 1, Detroit Lions. Number 2, the Cincinnati Reds. So know how to pick them.
Look, man. I was a Cleveland guy for a long time. I get it. Rooting for team sports is stupid, and we shouldn't raise our children to do it. I think that was like the theme of my last conversation there with Brian. I guess maybe my last question, as a dumb outsider from following the sport from afar for a while, the kind of running meme was the Pac-12 was no longer a power conference. It had devolved into intramurals. It could, it's a 2-bid league kind of thing. And clearly we see at the top, there's some really strong teams. Maybe some other teams that historically have been a little bit better are struggling a little bit. Does this league suck? Is it good? Is there reason to be optimistic about the future? Tell us what we should think about the league that's playing when we all go to bed.
I think there's absolutely reasons to be optimistic. And that's been, the big debate for the last, several years has been which is going to happen first, because you got these 2 lengthy droughts in college basketball. A West Coast team has not won the national title since all the way back in 97 when Arizona upset Kentucky. And a Big Ten team hasn't won the national title since 2000 when Michigan State did it. So there's this whole, which is going to happen first? West Coast champion, Big Ten champion. Both have certainly strong chances to break those streaks this year. I think the same was true last year. Yeah, I feel like the West Coast streak probably a stronger chance of being broken because you've got the Pac-12 teams and you've also got Gonzaga, which technically counts. But I think that if you're a fan of the Pac-12, you have to be encouraged by what Mick Cronin's done in a limited amount of time at UCLA. You have to be encouraged by, assuming he stays put, what Andy Enfield's doing at USC right now. And then the big thing is how quickly Arizona's bounced back from its, shall we say, issues. They go out there, they hire Tommy Lloyd, who was the longtime right-hand man for Mark Few at Gonzaga. and he's crushing it. I mean, they're one of the best teams in the country. They're in the mix for a number 1 seed.
Yeah.
They had that down year last year. They finally made the decision to go ahead and part ways with Sean Miller before the NCAA probably forced their hand and made them. It seems like it's paying off. We'll see what happens when they hear from the IRP, which I believe is set to happen sometime in 2045. I think that's the timeline right now. We don't know. I don't know if the IRP actually exists. I don't know if they're doing anything. If they do, and they are, then Arizona will receive a punishment word. I don't know, sometime in the next year, you would guess.
No.
Good Lord. But they're rolling right now.
Allegedly, before the heat death of the universe, I was talking to a couple of ADs and folks at the NCAA convention about what enforcement might look like in a post-new constitution world. The one thing that everybody, P5, G5, 1 AAA, Chicago State kind of program, everybody agrees the current enforcement mechanism sucks. And this new system that we thought was, that all these blue ribbon panels agreed on somehow sucks even more.
It's awful. I mean, you look at here in Louisville. I mean, Louisville fans are hoping that the fact that the program has cleaned house is going to help them with the NCAA deal. We've cleaned house like 5 times at this point. I mean, we've got interim president again. I mean, it's
in the floorboards, man. Like, and Memphis is kind of like that. We used to joke that USC and Texas were kind of like that. Like, if you change presidents, ADs, and coaches, and there's still issues, then I don't know what else you can do. It's not like you can change your fans. You can't change your boosters.
I was a little bit encouraged that the IRP, when they came out of the NC State ruling, which was lenient, I think most people would agree, no postseason ban, no real long-term ramifications. They said, one of our goals is we don't want to punish people who had nothing to do with that, which I think is a strong step in the right direction. I get that you can't let universities completely skate. I've never really understood why you don't just hit these schools in their pocketbooks as opposed to, punishing players who, I mean, the kids at Louisville right now, incoming freshmen next year who potentially could miss the NCAA tournament if the IRP says no, they were like in 5th grade when this was happening. The FBI stuff was first coming out. Like, they have no recollection of this even being a news story. And Louisville's they're about to have their 3rd different president since this started. They're about to have their 2nd different athletic director, and if you want to count the interim coach David Padgett, their 3rd different men's basketball head coach. They're even talking about bringing Tom Jurich back. So the guy who was there when this all started might be back.
I've heard that too. Listen, this is the great thing about college sports, right? Is that we are incapable of having new arguments.
Exactly.
Occasionally change the protagonists and the numbers, and sometimes we don't even do those. We're just going to reboot it, which is, I think, both great for you because content, but also terrible. I talked with Mark Ennis about this a couple of days ago. I just want you guys to have a boring week.
Never.
Mike, but before I let you go here, have there been? Is there anything I forgot? Either a major storyline, a major player, a major program that you've seen from this season that maybe a casual person should be aware of?
I don't know how many casual fans are aware of this, but the head coach at Duke has actually been there for a long time. His name is very difficult to spell. It's difficult to say. I'm going to try to get it right. I believe
he's flying under the radar. Yeah, I didn't even bother bringing this up because I figured who would potentially be interested in a private school in the research triangle.
Yeah, I mean, they're having an okay year, but it is his last season, so that's something of note. Eventually, I think that's something that probably the major networks are going to pick up on. After the Super Bowl, they'll probably start paying attention to the fact that it's Coach K's last year. But that would be the one thing that I would throw out there. The ACC being awful, if we're being serious, is probably a storyline that I think a lot of people are going to pick up on. Duke is good. They're a legitimate, I think, top 10 team and a legitimate national title contender. There's nobody else in the ACC that I think is even top 25 good. Carolina, in its first year under Hubert Davis, has been a big disappointment. Virginia, even though they're per usual under Tony Bennett, getting stronger as the year goes on, is not what they've been in years past. Virginia Tech, massive disappointment. Wake Forest is actually maybe the 2nd best team in the conference, which has shocked everybody. Props to Steve Forbes getting it done in year 2 there. But the ACC, it's got Duke and it's got really nobody that I think is going to be a top, 5 seed, maybe not a top 6 seed after them. It is as bad as the ACC's been. And that's something that I think maybe the football-centric fan who tunes into college basketball after the Super Bowl is going to be really surprised by when they start locking in here in a couple weeks.
This is a great point, and just goes to show how deranged Extra Points brain I've picked up here when I'm talking with you. And my first thought is, let's talk about the Pac-12's depth, and forgetting, of course, that the premier league in college basketball has been complete dog crap. Outside of the top one or two teams, this is the ACC football joke, right? Like,
exactly.
Yeah. Georgia Tech, Notre Dame, Miami have all been, it seems like pretty significant disappointments. It's going to be what, 3-bid league, 2-bid league?
I think they probably end up getting 4. I mean, Notre Dame is hitting their stride. Notre Dame actually is leading the conference right now, which is sort of it's shocking. It would be funny. There's been this whole thing with Duke where they've been the preseason favorite to win the ACC in 9 of the last 11 years, and they've won the ACC in 0 of those 11 years. It's been this trend, and if they don't get it done this year in Coach K's final season, have you guys heard about this? Then it would be a shocker, because they're really the only, I think, legitimate national title contender in this field. Miami's been a little bit of an overachiever, but I mean, there's nobody else good in the conference. There's not. It's woeful, and it's always as bad at the bottom as it usually is. BC's bad, Pitt's bad, Louisville is tanking. They're not helping things clearly. Syracuse is just okay, although I'm sure they'll zombie their way into the first 4 and then make a run to the Sweet 16.
I know, the world's worst play-in 12 seed, because they somehow won the league every time, and I hate watching them.
Yeah, if they get in, though, if they're in that first 4 or they're in as an 11 seed, don't even think about it. Don't look at the opponent. Don't worry about it. Pencil them into the second weekend, because they're winning at least 2 games every single year it happens.
Yep. Mike, thanks so much for taking some time to chat with us. For our listeners, where can they find the stuff that you're producing right now?
Cardchronicle.com for all your Louisville-centric stuff. I'll have some more college basketball stuff there as we get into the postseason as well. At Card Chronicle on Twitter. You can also listen to the Mike Rutherford Show on 1450 The Sports Buzz. At 1450 Big X on Twitter is the Twitter account there if you want to catch podcasts. So all that good stuff floating around there all the time.
You bet. We'll throw in a couple more links to those in the show notes. Mike, hey, thanks again. We appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the season, and we'll keep an eye on that Coach K fella, see if anything interesting happens there.
Of course, Matt. Thanks so much for having me, man.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. This show, of course, is presented by our friends at Home Field Apparel. Home Field Apparel makes the most comfortable, the most unique, the best officially licensed collegiate sports apparel. I'm wearing a Marquette hoodie right now. My home office is freezing because I live in Chicago, and it's a basement and it's freezing there. So I basically will wear one of these things at all times. If they made a Home Field officially licensed sports coat, I wear that, or maybe a leather jacket or some kind of winter parka or something. They don't have those, but they do have these extremely comfortable soft hoodies. And look at this great design, right? I mean, everyone looks good in baby blue. Even a guy who's got a face made for podcasting like me. I didn't go to Marquette. I've been there once or twice, but I'm about stealing valor, university valor here on this show. You can get a bunch of other hoodies, whether that's Louisville, whether that's Gonzaga, whether that's Alabama, all kinds of big programs. They're also debuting a new program every week for the next couple of weeks as part of their big new Saturday season 3. Last week, they debuted South Carolina's collection, which was wonderful. This week, NC State, a basketball school, a school with a bunch of really cool vintage Wolfpacky logos. So I think it's really the program's biggest win in a couple of decades, as far as I'm concerned. You want to make sure you grab all of that, and whether that's a hoodie, whether that's a T-shirt, whether that's the world's most comfortable sweatpants, you want to get the best collegiate licensed apparel you can find in the vintage, unique logos that everyone else forgot about, but not you, because you are cultured and handsome. Save 15% off your first order by going to homefieldapparel.com and use promo code EXTRAPOINTS at checkout to get 15% off. Help support this program. Help support Brian and I's degenerate home field addictions. Help us stay comfortable, warm, and wearing wonderful logos from schools that we did not attend. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter at MattBrownEP. You can follow Extra Points at www.extrapointsmb.com. We've doing some new website rebranding and some tweaks there that I think that you will enjoy. And of course, you can continue to find this show twice a week for free on this feed. If you're not subscribed on Spotify or iTunes or what other device or network you get your podcast. I'm sure we're on that. Be sure to subscribe. And if you enjoy this show, leave us that 5-star rating. Tell your friends, let people know, because that helps us continue to make new shows and continue to tell other people too that they should advertise on this show so we can afford to buy more home field stuff. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll have Brian back on here the next episode. We'll catch up with you later on this week.